Hey, folks, welcome back to yet another interview here at the Loudini Rock and Roll Circus, part of our interview series. Today I am talking with Joe Deninzon. Born in St. Petersburg, Russia, Joe has been hailed by the critics as the Jimi Hendrix of the violin because of his innovative style on the electric 7-string violin and his compositions combining jazz, rock, with gypsy influences all mixed in there. He's a musician. This is a musician who transcends many genres. He's worked with people like Sheryl Crow, Bruce Springsteen, Phoebe Snow, Ritchie Blackmore, Smokey Robinson, Les Paul, among a whole host of others. He's also performed as a solo electric violinist with the New York City Ballet and has performed, co-written, and musically directed the Broadway show Spider Dance with percussionist Alessandra Bellani. Joe is the lead singer and violinist for the band Stratospherius, who's got his own band, too. And they've just released their 5th CD, The Next World, on Steve Vai's Digital Nations label. They're named the Best Jam Band in Musicians Atlas Independent Music Awards. Joe can be heard on over 100 CDs and jingles as a violinist and string arranger. And if we went on and on and on, we would have no time to do the interview because Joe's got tons of stuff going on. Joe Deninzon, welcome to the Loudini Rock and Roll Circus. Thank you so much for joining us.
Lou, it's an honor and a pleasure to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. So let's go to the beginning. This is the best place to start. So how did you get started on the violin?
When I was 5, my dad just shoved a violin in my hands, and my parents are both musicians. My father is a violinist, and they're both classical musicians. So it was kind of a natural thing that I would play an instrument, and I started out on piano, and he wanted me to take violin, and that was it, actually, and I stuck with it. There were times when I really hated practicing and kind of rebelled against my dad, but I stuck with the instrument, as you could see, and, here I am. But I didn't go the traditional route. I didn't want to follow my father's footsteps and join an orchestra. I was really inspired by other styles of music.
We can see that. I definitely want to know more about that. Now, you migrated to the U.S., right? When did you come to the United States?
Well, my parents emigrated. I was 4 when I came with them. So I'm a naturalized citizen.
Gotcha. So for all intents and purposes, you've been here the whole time. So you didn't want to do the classical thing so much. So your way to rebel and still play violin was to bring in some rock. Talk about how that developed.
I think it was a combination. I was completely immersed in classical music the first 5 years of my life. When I came here to the States, I turned on the radio and I heard all this different stuff. And I was sort of an outcast at school because I didn't speak English that well when I was 6 and 7 years old. And I really wanted to be able to communicate with people, to fit in. And I think that was a part of what drew me to rock and roll, just the power of communication, just the mass audience that it could reach, and the performance aspect of it, But I had sort of, for a while, I led a parallel life. I was studying classical music on the violin, going through all the repertoire that a typical violinist would go through growing up. And then I took up guitar, bass, and started writing songs and playing with rock and jazz bands around town, around Cleveland, where I was growing up. And those worlds kind of were separate. And when I was 16, those worlds collided. Michael Stanley asked me to play with him on stage, and I was able to improvise on the bass guitar and on the electric guitar, but I had never improvised on the violin up to that point. But I knew the notes, I knew the language, and it just sort of came to me. It was there. It was in my mind and in my fingers. So that was sort of a turning point, and I decided, wow, I don't know a lot of string players that could do this kind of stuff, and I've been at this instrument longer than anything else. So I think I should stick with it, and I could carve my own niche on this instrument.
So you had a sort of moment, like a defining moment there on stage with Michael Stanley, where you realized, wait a minute, I can play rock and play violin.
Exactly, and in Cleveland there were no rock or jazz violinists at the time. I didn't have any string role models like that. I was really into guitar players like Steve Vai, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page. The list goes on and on. Nuno Bettencourt. Those were the guys that inspired me, and I was trying to be a guitar hero, and I emulated those guys. But then I think the way they played inspired me as a violinist. So I sort of had to figure out my own what I was going to do, what my voice was, and now it's a very different scene. There's a lot more electric violin players out there, a lot more role models for young kids who want to get into string playing outside of the classical music world. But back then, it was like the early 90s. I was in high school, and it was kind of a different scene, So I had to sort of feel around and try different things out and figure out what I wanted to do. And
were you at that time? We're sort of jumping around here, but I wanted to get to this anyway.
Sure.
Were you aware of Mark Wood at that time?
Vaguely aware. I hadn't heard his CD until I think I was about 18. I'd heard of his name, and I really loved what he was doing. He was sort of basically doing what I wanted to do.
Okay.
Rocking out on the electric violin. I was really into hard rock and metal, and that was his bag, So I think when I was around 17 or 18, I heard Mark's CD. I heard Jean-Luc Ponty for the first time, and I heard Grappelli, who was a jazz influence on me. And then in college, I discovered Jerry Goodman from the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and that completely blew my mind. And I was hooked for life. I'm like, yeah, I want to be an electric violinist. This is what I want to do.
Okay, so the rock world is opening up to you. You're a trained classical musician. You don't really completely leave classical, do you? You're still doing classical stuff, correct?
Well, as a compromise with my parents, because I think they kept privately hoping I would come back to the fold and be, a straight shooter, a classical violin player. They convinced me to go to Indiana University and major in I was doing jazz studies there, but double majoring in violin performance. So I was getting my butt kicked by my classical teacher and practicing, all day, every day, concertos and Bach and everything else. But at the same time, I was learning about jazz and harmony and improvisation. So I was really trying to develop a wide skill set while I was there.
Okay. So other than your parents kind of pulling you sort of eventually embraced both worlds. You sort of found a way. Those of you out there that are not familiar with what Joe does, he has sort of brought the two together. You're able to sort of kind of do like a little dance between the two worlds. Now, how does that work?
It's interesting. I think it was out of necessity, because when I moved to New York, I wanted to be a working musician and make my living as a freelance musician. And if you're a violin player, inevitably you will be asked to play in orchestras and string quartets, and be asked to play solo recitals and things like that. So I had to keep my classical chops up, but I really was interested in this alternative universe, and I bought a 7-string electric Viper from Mark Wood, which I still play. And basically, I put out my first CD the summer before I moved to New York. It was all local Cleveland musicians that played on it, and it was all instrumental jazz fusion record called Electric Blue. And my goal was to come to New York. I was doing my master's degree in jazz violin in New York, and I was looking for musicians to form a band and play out and play my music. I went through tons of different lineup changes and a lot of experimentation. And I was always into singing and songwriting. So in addition to my jazz and fusion interest, I really wanted to write songs and do heavy rock and kind of meld it together. So it morphed into what is now Stratospherius. But while that was all happening, I was trying to make a living. So I was doing commercials, Broadway shows, weddings, teaching, playing, in orchestras and chamber music, all the stuff that all string players have to do. So as a result, I had to sort of be in shape for all of those things. When people think of a violinist, most of the time they want to hear traditional violin sound. They want an acoustic violin. I started playing the electric violin as a soloist in wedding bands and in other bands, and people became more aware of it and started requesting the electric violin specifically more and more to the point where if I was unavailable, so that they're like, there are the guys that do what you do, and there weren't that many, and now there's a little bit more, But it's sort of like you're creating I felt like I was creating a new market for the electric violin, just on an everyday basis for everyday gigs. I don't want to take the credit for it. There was a few other guys doing it as well, but it's grown over the 20 years that I've been on the scene, it's really the demand and the awareness among just regular folks of the electric violin and what it can do has grown tremendously.
You mentioned songwriting, and you did mention a few You talked about some of your influences, but when it comes to songwriting, what are your influences there, and how do you write? Do you write on the violin? Because you said you also play guitar.
Yeah, it's different. Sometimes I'll write on the violin. I'll come up with a riff on the violin and just work it. Sometimes I'll write on the guitar if I want to work out some chords. And lyrics are a separate thing. I keep a journal. I just write lyrics all the time. And I write little riffs all the time, and sometimes I refer to those. And sometimes, Bruce Springsteen, one of my musical heroes, once said it's like putting a car together from parts of different cars. You take a verse from here and a line from here, and you put it together, and certain things just match up. Sometimes songwriting process can be like that. And other times it just all comes together in a flash. You envision the whole song in your head, and it works. It's rare when that happens, but it's pretty incredible when it does.
Do you write as a band with Stratusferius, or do you do all the writing?
I do a bulk of the majority of the writing. We have a new song that our drummer wrote that we just recorded. But what I'll do, I'll write a song, sketch it out, I'll bring it into the band, and they'll tell me how much of it sucks, and they'll improve on it. I'm like, please, guys, does this work or does that? They'll really provide their input. So we kind of work on it together and bring it and chisel it out, so to speak. Which I like.
So Stratusferius,
yes.
So Stratusferius is a real band, and it's not just like some backup guys that come and back you up.
Well, there's a core band.
Gotcha.
With Luciano Padua on drums, Jamie Bishop on bass, and Aurelian Budinak on guitar. But everyone's gotten so busy. I'm at the point now where I have 3 drummers. I have about 3 people on each instrument that's sort of in rotation that know the music very well, that play with us regularly. So it's almost like myself and sort of a collective of other musicians, which is fine and fun, actually. It's very hard to maintain the same lineup of a band.
Well, the scene seems to be like a lot of people are playing in a lot of different bands. I mean, a lot of people I talk to, that's their situation, and it just sort of seems to be the way the scene is right now. So you got to do what you got to do to keep it going.
Exactly. But the show must go on, as they say. Our guitarist Aurelian took a touring gig in Canada, and he's been in Canada since July. He'll be there through November. So I've been using another guitarist named Michelangelo Querinali, who's played with us also for about 2 years. Many shows he's done with us. So he's basically a member of the band as well. So that's sort of how it works, And when Aurelian comes back, hopefully he'll do more shows with us, and everybody kind of does their own thing and then comes back and plays together.
That's a testimony to like great musicianship, to sort of be able to step into different situations and really still give it that flow. So congratulations on having that. Hey, tell me about Sonic Voyage.
Sonic Voyage is something I was working on with my manager Ann Layton, and it started out with 2 other bands, Shadow Eden, which is based out of Long Island, and a band called Circuline, based out of the Poughkeepsie area, both progressive rock bands. We wanted to do sort of a touring mini progressive rock festival where we also incorporate educational workshops before the shows and also have local bands share the bills with us. We're trying to collaborate with local schools of rock, and we did our first tour Memorial Day weekend throughout New England. And we're working on dates in October and November in the New York area as well. So we're hoping to develop it. It's still, in the development stages, but it's a cool idea. We hope to also rotate the lineups and feature different bands on the prog scene.
Speaking of the prog scene, like, are there who's out there right now that you think is like, just it's your opinion, just how you feel about it,
mm-hmm.
that you feel is like really kind of like gonna really break, or is breaking really big, or is really important? I don't mean
one
to put on the spot. Sorry.
No, I love being put on the spot. Well, off the top of my head, the two bands I mentioned that we toured with were awesome, Circuline and Shadow Eden. There's a few bands, my personal favorites that I like. There's a cool young group from New Jersey called Thank You Scientist. They're incredible. Check them out. There's also a group called T Club, which is very interesting. I'm a big fan of, I actually discovered last year Sound of Contact, which is Simon Collins' band, Phil Collins' son. And their first album, their debut album is a masterpiece, in my opinion. The writing is great, the production is great. It takes you on a journey. It's a beautiful record. And they're working on the second one. But those are a few off the top of my head. I've also been a longtime fan of the band Muse, which has been around now for 20 years. They're not really new, but I guess they're a later generation of the progressive rock world. There's a bunch of great bands out there. Out of the Beard Space from Philly is another young band that's up and coming. We recently did a show with Autumn Electric, which is from Seattle. I could go on and on.
Well,
but there's a lot of cool. There's a lot of cool. There's a lot of cool stuff. It's just sort of underground. You got to find it.
Well, that is the scene. Joe, I mean, right now, that is, you have to kind of go out and start digging and read blogs and listen to stuff like this and talk to other musicians, because that's how the word is really kind of being spread these days. This isn't exactly on American Idol. So let's step back a little bit.
If I'm talking too much, just shut me up anytime.
You're fine.
I'm sorry.
What I want to talk about, you do have something very cool coming up. Here in the next, I believe it's in the next couple of weeks, Dream Diary. Now, what is Dream Diary?
Well, on my bucket list, I wanted to write an electric violin concerto for full orchestra and 7-string electric violin. And people have been mentioning over the years, you should do something like that. I'm like, yeah, someday I will. Someday, who knows when. And then I got this opportunity. This conductor named Douglas Droste, who is a friend of mine. He used to be the orchestra director at Oklahoma State. And I often do this. I go into different schools and I'll do like a 2-day residency where I'll coach the orchestra. I'll do some of my arrangements, do some improv workshops, and we do a big concert. So anyway, a few years back, he asked me to do it down in Oklahoma. And since then, he got the position of musical director, Muncie Symphony Orchestra in Indiana. So he says, Joe, you got to come play with us. And I'm like, what should I play? I don't want to play Tchaikovsky concerto. There's a million players that could do it better than me. I'd rather do something different. So I'm like, Here's my chance. I'm just going to write this thing, and I'm going to do it. So it's a 25-minute long piece for full orchestra. It's my first try at orchestrating for full orchestra. It's basically, it features the electric violin with all the effects, and it's a rock and roll kind of hard rock concerto. It's sort of like a long instrumental Stradivarius piece. And
how do you write something that's 25 minutes long? It just sounds like a miracle to me.
It was about almost a year and a half of work. I started it in April of 2014 and just handed it in this past July. And I'm still tweaking it. But the premiere is September 19th, and the concept is it sort of takes you on there's 4 movements, 4 parts to it, and they're sort of loosely based on the cycles of sleep. The first one is called Falling and Flying. I read up that, in sleep studies, people experience the sensation of falling and flying when they're going to sleep initially. And then the second movement is Delta Waves, which is when your heartbeat speeds up and you start seeing dreams. And third is called Rapid Eye Movement. It's when you have vivid dreams, and the fourth is called Waking Dream. And there's no specific imagery. I like to leave it up to the imagination of the audience. But it's kind of it sort of pays tribute to the late 80s, early 90s guitar rock that I grew up on, like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani. They had these albums like Flying in a Blue Dream, and Steve Vai's Passion and Warfare. He said he kept a dream diary where he wrote down his dreams as soon as he woke up so he wouldn't forget them, and they in turn inspired his musical writing. So that was sort of loosely the concept around the concerto. That's it. I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm working on it a lot.
It sounds like a real accomplishment. while we're talking about it, if people are interested in checking it out, is there something where they can go to get tickets or get more information on it?
MUNCIE, MuncieSymphony.org. And unfortunately, there's no live streaming for this concert. I hope to get a good recording out of it. I have to get permission if I'm going to release it. But my long-term goal is to take it on the road and play it with different orchestras all over the world. So hopefully folks will get a chance to hear it sometime in the future if they're not in that area on September 19th.
It seems like everything you do has that Joe Deninzon stamp on it. You know, you don't just kind of walk in and just say, okay, well, just play it, you know, and I'm going to write a violin concerto. I'll just write a violin concerto. You brought this whole Joe Satriani, Steve Vai influenced thing to it. So you've played with a lot of other artists over the years, and I wanted to talk about this for a minute. So who were like, give me a couple highlights. Give me one or two of like the sort of wow moments.
Recording with Richie Blackmore at his house was pretty wild. Out of the blue, I got a call from his manager. He wanted me to come to his house in Long Island and laid out some tracks for Blackmore's Night. And I knocked on the door. Richie answers this huge house on the north shore of Long Island by the ferry that goes to Connecticut. And I go into the basement, and there's all these gold records of Rainbow and Deep Purple on the wall. And I'm recording in his basement. It was wild. And then and he's really into medieval stuff. What do you call them? The armor statues with the standing against the wall.
Right.
Knights. Yeah. He's got all this really cool stuff in his house. It's really trippy. That was a really interesting experience. Another highlight was playing in Madison Square Garden with Bruce Springsteen. I was playing in an 8-piece string section. It wasn't just me, but he was a childhood hero of mine. He was sort of my entryway to American culture. I remember being 8 years old and listening to Born in the USA, you know, on the highway with my dad. Somehow I just connected to his music from an early age, even though it has really nothing to do with what I write and perform. But his work ethic and his stage persona really inspired me a lot. So meeting him and being on that stage with him was incredible. Also, you know, I'm fortunate to play in a group called Sweet Plantain, which is a Latin jazz acoustic string quartet. And we just did a 1-month tour of Sweden. We've been all over Alaska, all over the States. We're actually this week playing the Grand Canyon Music Festival this weekend. I've had some amazing experience. Those guys are my brothers, we're good friends, and I love playing that music. So it's everything is a gift. I love everything I do, and it's all different. I never get bored, and I like all the people I'm working with, and that's all you need. You know? That's
a great place to be in life. Good, congratulations to you, man.
Thanks.
You know, here I'm going to do a couple of days because you work with a couple of string camps too. Mark, you work using with Mark O'Connor and Mark Wood, right?
I actually filled in 2010 as the rock guy, quote unquote, at Mark O'Connor camp.
Okay.
When it was in New York, Tracy Silverman is the regular guy that teaches there. I've been teaching at Mark Wood's camp for 5 years, and that's one of my favorite weeks of the year because it's basically a bunch of kids that are me when I was 16.
Cool.
But I didn't have that camp. If I had that camp, I would just, I don't know what I would do. My head would explode. That camp existed when I was 16. But it's a bunch of string nerds who are all misfits at their schools, and they want to rock out, you know. And they sort of find each other and form this really strong bond at this camp. It's a really beautiful thing to see. And it's a lot of fun, and all the faculty is great. And it's very rewarding, you know. And it's people of all ages, not just high school kids, but it's a lot of high school kids.
Yeah, oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of high school kids and everything, what advice would you give to young musicians who are you know, they want to be they've got the rock sort of vibe, but they don't play instruments that are commonly associated with rock or pop? Okay, that's kind of where you came from. At the time, violin really wasn't commonly. There were a couple people, as we mentioned, but really violin wasn't, you know, really associated with rock or pop. So what kind of advice would you give to these young guys today and girls?
I say Play and celebrate the music you love. Learn the fundamentals. Work hard on the foundation of your instrument. Learn the tradition, but play the music you love. Figure out what it is that drives you and do it, regardless of what instrument you play. Your instrument shouldn't limit your genre. The longer I live, the more I'm convinced of that. You can play oboe and play jazz or play even hip hop. You can do anything you want. There are no limits, and you shouldn't think that there are. And the other thing I would say, take every gig. Embrace every experience, because you never know what you're going to take away from it, what you're going to learn from it. Try not to be too opinionated, especially when you're young.
Good advice, man. Good advice. I this isn't about me, it's about you, but I had similar experiences when I was young playing too, and I took a lot of gigs that I knew my friends would never ever do, but it ended up being really rewarding. It really added to my my understanding of music and really expanded my sort of thinking and consciousness as a musician. So guys, if you're listening out there, you guys are listening out there, you guys, please take Joe's advice. It's really really important. Any closing thoughts? Do you want to talk about anything where you're going to be next, so we can kind of plug whatever you got going on? You have the Muncie Orchestra Dream Diary coming up, but you're traveling with this other group right now. So if you want to go ahead and plug a few things.
Well, two main things. If you're in the Southwest over Labor Day weekend, I'm doing 4 concerts this weekend at the Grand Canyon South Rim. Thursday night with harmonica player Robert Bonfilio, Friday and Saturday with Sweet Plantain, and Sunday with Sweet Plantain. And then September 19th is the world premiere of the Electric Violin Concerto in Muncie, Indiana. In October, there's a bunch of Stratospherious dates. We're playing in Nyack, New York on the 16th, in Detroit on the 23rd, and Erie on the 24th, and in Queens on the 30th. And there'll be more dates added. And then I guess just go to my website.
Well, that's what you guys can go to joedeninzon.com, JoeDeninzon.com, and it's a pretty active site. There's regular updates and everything. You guys can check out everything there. Anything else?
And
I forgot to ask. Go ahead. There is something. Go ahead.
I'm also on Twitter at Joe Deninzon. Find me there if you want.
So he's into the tweeting, guys. So look out.
Not obsessively, but when it counts, I'll tweet.
Cool. All right, Joe. If there's not anything else you want to add before we roll out of here,
I think we covered it all. Thank you so much, and happy Memorial Day. Enjoy your week. Thanks for having me on your show.
Hey, Joe, thanks a lot, man. You have a great weekend, and it sounds like you've got a really busy week, Labor Day weekend coming up, so try to get a little chilling out in there, man. Don't overwork it, all right?
I'm trying. It's a balancing act, but I'll take your advice.
Hey, take care, man. Keep taking those gigs, and we will be following you, and I will keep playing you on the Rock and Roll Circus. Have a great one, Joe. Take care, buddy.
Great speaking with you. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.